The pounding on my front door came like thunder, shaking me out of the late-night calm I had been enjoying with a cup of coffee. It wasn't the kind of knock a neighbor uses when they come over to borrow sugar. No, this was a deliberate, forceful pounding that carried with it the message of authority, or at least the attempt to fake it. My instincts sharpened instantly. Years of training, teaching, and operating with real law enforcement units taught me how to read situations, and this one screamed trouble. I slid quietly to the side of the window, lifting the blinds just enough to peek outside. What I saw almost made me laugh. 3 men stood stiffly on my porch, dressed in tactical gear that looked like it had been thrown together from an army surplus store. The vests didn't fit, the boots looked brand new and untouched by dirt, and the badges they flashed in the porch light looked more like toys than law enforcement insignia. I could smell a setup from a mile away, and my first thought was the same name that had been haunting me ever since I moved into this neighborhood, Karen. That woman had made it her personal mission to make my life miserable from day one. She was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, treating every rule like it was written in stone by a higher power, and every neighbor like her personal subject. She had screamed about my truck in the driveway, complained about my dog's collar being too reflective, and even filed written complaints about the color of my shed. None of it stuck because I followed county codes, not her made-up HOA demands. But clearly, she wasn't done. Seeing those 3 fake officers standing there, puffing their chests like they were in some low-budget movie, I knew this was her latest stunt. The man in front, the tallest of the 3, shouted at me to open the door immediately and step outside with my hands in the air. His voice cracked slightly as he said it, and I couldn't help but smirk. Real officers don't talk like that. Real officers don't show up without marked vehicles, without radios buzzing on their shoulders, without a clear chain of command. And real officers certainly don't announce they're here on HOA business. I let a long silence hang in the air just to make them sweat. My coffee mug was still warm in my hand as I leaned against the wall, listening to them bark hollow commands. They thought they were in control, but the truth was, I already owned this situation. I'd been in real door breach scenarios. I'd trained men and women who had kicked in barricaded entries under fire. I'd watched as entire SWAT units executed precise movements with calm, deadly efficiency. And now, I was looking at the opposite, 3 amateurs dressed like kids playing soldier. Finally, I opened the door just a crack, enough to let my voice out but not enough to give them access. "Which department are you with?" I asked, my tone calm and steady. The tall one cleared his throat and muttered, "We're with the county sheriff's department." I raised an eyebrow. "Which county?" He stuttered, glancing sideways at the others, and that was all I needed to confirm. These weren't officers. They were imposters. Cheap fakes sent to scare me into obedience, probably with the idea that they'd drag me out, humiliate me in front of my neighbors, and teach me some kind of lesson for refusing to bow to Karen's HOA authority. Instead, they had just walked into a trap of their own making. I let the porch light click on, bathing them in a bright, unforgiving glow. Their mismatched gear looked even worse under the light, and I noticed one of their patches had been stitched on upside down. The smallest of the group tried to shift his weight to look tough, but he was shaking, his nervousness visible even from behind the glass. I let out a small chuckle, and the sound seemed to rattle them. "Badges look a little funny," I said evenly. "You mind if I take a closer look?" They stiffened immediately, the tall one snapping, "Just come outside. Don't make this harder than it has to be." That's when I knew for certain, these guys had no idea what they were doing. Real law enforcement officers don't beg you to comply, they control the scene with professionalism. These guys were desperate actors, and their stage was crumbling fast. I kept my face composed, but inside, I was already planning my next move. Years of tactical training weren't just about handling weapons or breaching doors. They were about reading body language, assessing threats, controlling escalation, and knowing exactly when to strike. These 3 had already given themselves away. Their lack of coordination, their empty threats, their nervous shifting, all of it told me they weren't a danger to me, not in the way they hoped. Still, they were dangerous in another sense. Desperate people make bad choices, and if Karen had convinced them this was some sort of righteous mission, they might do something stupid. That meant I had to be careful, deliberate, and precise. Slowly, I slid my hand to the side table near the door where my phone sat charging. Without taking my eyes off them, I picked it up and dialed. As soon as dispatch answered, I gave my address and explained in clipped, professional words that 3 individuals in fake uniforms were attempting to impersonate officers at my door. My voice was calm, measured, the kind of voice dispatchers know to take seriously. On the porch, I saw panic ripple through the imposters. The one in front barked, "Hang up the phone. Right now." His voice was too shrill, too untrained. He wasn't used to being disobeyed because in his world, people probably folded when someone yelled loud enough. But I wasn't just anyone. I leaned forward slightly, letting my voice carry through the crack in the door. "You boys should have done your homework. I trained the people who are about to pull up here, and when they do, you're going to wish you had stayed home tonight." Their faces shifted instantly, confidence melting into fear. I saw the short one's hand twitch toward the plastic handcuffs on his belt, then falter. The tall one tried to regroup, shouting another command, but his voice cracked again. Behind them, movement caught my eye. Karen was standing at the edge of her driveway, arms folded smugly across her chest, watching like a queen waiting for her subjects to do her dirty work. She thought she was about to witness my humiliation, maybe even my arrest. But she had no idea what storm she had just unleashed. The floodlights on my house clicked on, bathing the entire porch and yard in harsh white brilliance. Every second of this was now being recorded from multiple angles, the cameras feeding directly into cloud storage. The fakes froze like deer in headlights. And me? I took another sip of my coffee, steady as stone, knowing this was only the beginning of the show. The silence after I switched on my floodlights was heavy, the kind of silence that makes even confident men second-guess themselves. The 3 fake officers shifted nervously, their cheap gear glinting under the harsh white glow. I could see every detail now, the frayed Velcro on their vests, the crooked name patches, and the flimsy metal of their badges that looked like they came from a novelty shop. Their confidence was evaporating like mist in the sun, and I knew I had the upper hand. I kept my door cracked, body angled in control, my phone still pressed to my ear with the dispatcher on the line. She was calm, but I could hear the urgency in her tone as she asked me to confirm the number of individuals, their clothing, and their behavior. When I told her they were impersonating deputies, she went silent for a second, then assured me a unit was on the way with lights and sirens. She told me to stay inside, lock my doors, and wait. I almost chuckled. If she knew who she was talking to, she'd realize I didn't need that advice. I wasn't some frightened civilian cowering in the dark. I had spent years teaching tactical officers how to keep their heads cool in the most high-stress situations imaginable. Compared to those scenarios, this was a backyard play. The tallest imposter stepped forward, trying to regain control. He puffed out his chest, voice raised louder this time, as though volume could compensate for his lack of authority. "Sir, if you don't open this door right now, you're going to be in serious trouble." His threat hung weakly in the air. I tilted my head slightly and studied him, the way I used to study recruits who cracked under pressure during drills. His breathing was fast, shoulders tight, eyes darting left and right. He wasn't built for confrontation. He was built for intimidation only when he thought the other person would fold. I wasn't folding. I was documenting. "Really?" I said evenly, raising my phone slightly so they could see the glowing red record light. "Because the sheriff's office says otherwise. They're on their way right now, and they're going to have some serious questions about you 3. I saw the words hit them like bullets. The shorter man cursed under his breath, his hand twitching as if he wanted to bolt. The third one, heavy-set and sweating under his too-tight vest, swallowed hard and avoided my gaze altogether. These weren't trained men. These were hired stooges who thought a badge and a vest would scare me into compliance. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement again. Karen had stepped closer now, standing on her driveway with her phone in hand, probably recording everything, thinking she was catching me resisting lawful orders. Her smug grin made my blood boil, but I didn't let it show. She thought this was her victory, her moment of triumph after months of trying to make me bow to her HOA dictatorship. She had no idea she was about to star in a very different show, one where she was exposed in front of the whole neighborhood as the fraud and bully she really was. The tall fake officer tried again, this time barking out something about me violating HOA Code 17 and being placed under arrest for non-compliance. That was the moment I almost burst out laughing. HOA Code 17? Did they really think shouting fake laws would intimidate me? It only confirmed what I already knew, they weren't even close to professionals. Real deputies don't enforce HOA rules. Real deputies enforce the law. And in this case, the law was about to enforce itself against them. I leaned against the doorframe casually, keeping my voice calm but sharp. You boys made a mistake tonight. You came to the wrong house. I don't just know what real law enforcement looks like, I trained them. And when they get here, they're going to spot you for the fakes you are in about 3 seconds flat. So, if I were you, I'd start thinking of what story you're going to tell when they put you in the back of a squad car. The short one cracked first. His eyes darted around like a trapped animal, and his breathing sped up. He muttered something to the tall one, shaking his head furiously. The heavy-set guy mumbled that maybe they should go. But the tall one was too deep in it now. He had Karen watching him, expecting results. He had his pride wrapped up in this ridiculous charade. So he doubled down, his voice breaking as he shouted, "Last warning, open the door or we'll break it down." That was the final nail in their coffin. My house wasn't just a regular suburban build. I'd reinforced it myself, steel core door, industrial-grade deadbolts, and shatterproof glass. This place was a fortress, and these amateurs had no chance of forcing their way in. More importantly, the moment they threatened forced entry, they crossed into serious criminal territory. Impersonation, attempted unlawful entry, conspiracy, it was all piling up. And I had every second recorded. Through my phone, I could hear the dispatcher telling me units were just minutes away. I gave her quick updates, never breaking eye contact with the imposters. The tension on my porch was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The fakes were sweating bullets, Karen was grinning like a villain in a bad movie, and me? I was calm, collected, and ready for the real show to start. I made a point of stepping fully into the light now, so they could see my face clearly, my calm eyes, my steady stance. "Here's the truth," I said, my voice low and commanding. "You're not officers. You're criminals playing dress-up. And when the real deputies pull up, they're going to treat you exactly like that. If you think you're walking away from this, you're wrong." For the first time, the tall one's mask cracked. His jaw tightened, and for a split second, I saw doubt flash in his eyes. He wasn't ready for someone to call his bluff so directly, with such confidence. His buddies were already on the verge of running, and he knew it. But pride kept him frozen, caught between fear and foolishness. Then, in the distance, I heard it. The faint wail of sirens cutting through the night air. My heart didn't race, it slowed. I knew exactly what was coming. The imposters heard it too, and panic rippled through them like electricity. The short one cursed loudly and stepped back off the porch. The heavy-set man wiped sweat from his brow and muttered that they had to leave. Karen's grin faltered, her phone lowering slightly as the sound grew louder and closer. The tall one tried to shout another order, but his voice cracked so badly it sounded more like a plea. The glow of headlights began to fill the street, red and blue lights flickering against the houses. Neighbors started peeking out their windows, some even stepping onto their lawns to see what was happening. The imposters froze like deer in headlights, caught between their fake authority and the crushing reality of what was about to arrive. Karen's smug expression melted into unease as she realized this wasn't going according to her script. The sheriff's deputies were seconds away, and her little plan was about to blow up in her face. I lowered my phone slowly, locked eyes with the tall fake, and said one final sentence, calm and cold, "Show's over." The sirens grew louder, bouncing off the houses and echoing down the street, and I could see the imposters unraveling by the second. The tall one who had been pretending to be in charge looked left and right, his fake authority draining from his posture. The short one was already taking steps backward toward the sidewalk, ready to bolt, while the heavy-set guy shifted nervously on his feet, sweat dripping down his forehead. Karen, who had been standing smugly with her arms crossed, began to realize this wasn't the show she had imagined. Her phone wavered in her hand, the camera now pointed more toward the ground than toward me. She had expected to see me in handcuffs, dragged away by her hired muscle, but instead, she was watching them panic like cornered rats. The neighbors had started coming out of their houses now, phones in hand, whispering to each other as the red and blue lights flashed closer. The quiet suburban street was suddenly alive with curiosity, the spectacle too dramatic to ignore. The first sheriff's cruiser rounded the corner, siren wailing, lights strobing in the dark. The imposters froze, caught like deer, while Karen's face shifted from confidence to horror. A second cruiser followed, then a third, pulling up fast and cutting across the curb. Doors flew open and real deputies spilled out, weapons drawn, voices sharp and commanding. The difference was instant and undeniable. Where the fakes barked empty orders, the deputies spoke with authority that brooked no argument. Hands up. Get on the ground now. The imposters didn't even hesitate. The short one dropped to his knees so fast he nearly fell on his face, throwing his hands into the air. The heavy-set man raised his trembling hands and lay flat on the grass without being told twice. The tall one tried to hold his ground for a moment, but when 3 rifles swung his way, his courage evaporated. He dropped his fake badge on the ground and went down like the rest. The deputies moved in with smooth, practiced precision, securing each of them with zip ties, checking them for weapons, and dragging them onto the lawn. The neighbors gasped and murmured, some filming openly now. The fakes looked pathetic, their cheap gear sagging, their faces pale under the floodlights. The tall one tried to stammer an excuse about official business, but one deputy cut him off immediately. You're under arrest for impersonating an officer. Don't say another word unless it's to your lawyer. The imposters were hauled to their feet, their fake uniforms now nothing but embarrassing costumes under the sharp gaze of real law enforcement. And then came Karen. She tried to insert herself into the chaos, rushing forward, her shrill voice carrying over the scene. Wait, there's been a mistake. They were acting under my authority. This man, he's violating HOA rules. You can't just let him get away with this. Her words tumbled out in a frenzy, desperation creeping into every syllable. The deputies turned toward her, unimpressed, one of them holding up a hand to stop her approach. Ma'am, unless you're a sworn officer, you don't have authority over anything here. And from what I'm seeing, you might have a lot of explaining to do. The crowd of neighbors began whispering louder now, some chuckling, some shaking their heads. Karen's voice faltered, her confidence cracking. She realized the deputies weren't on her side. She had overplayed her hand in the worst way possible. She tried again, pointing at me with a trembling finger. He's the problem. He refuses to follow HOA code. He's disrespectful. He's dangerous. The deputy raised an eyebrow and glanced at me, then back at her. The only dangerous thing here is hiring a group of criminals to impersonate law enforcement. If you know anything about this, now would be the time to be honest. I stepped forward slightly, finally opening my door fully and walking into the light. My hands were steady, my posture calm. One of the deputies, recognizing me from years past, broke into a grin. "Well, I'll be damned. I didn't realize this was your address. You trained me back in the academy, entry tactics course." He extended his hand, and I shook it firmly, the recognition sending ripples through the gathered crowd. Karen's jaw dropped, her face draining of color. The very people she thought would drag me away were saluting me instead. The deputy turned back to Karen, his tone sharper now. "Ma'am, you understand how serious this is, right? Impersonating officers is a felony. If you had any part in orchestrating this, you could be facing charges too." Karen sputtered, waving her hands frantically. No, I didn't. I just wanted him to respect the HOA rules. That's all. I didn't tell them to impersonate officers. I just. Her excuses fell apart as fast as her plan. The deputies weren't buying it, and the neighbors weren't either. Phones captured every second as her once commanding presence crumbled into pathetic rambling. Meanwhile, the imposters were loaded into the back of the squad cars, their heads bowed in shame. The short one begged for mercy, the heavy-set one muttered about just doing what they were told, and the tall one sat stone-faced, staring at the ground, his fake bravado gone. The deputies ignored their whining, slamming the car doors shut with finality. I stood there, calm and steady, watching it all unfold. The deputy I knew clapped me on the shoulder. "You handled this exactly right. Most people would have panicked or made the situation worse, but you kept your cool. We'll need your footage for evidence, but I think the case here is already open and shut." I nodded, already queuing up the video files from my home security system to send to the sheriff's office. Every word, every threat, every fake order was captured in high definition, impossible to dispute. Karen, meanwhile, was still pleading, her voice growing shriller as reality set in. "You don't understand. He's been undermining the HOA since he moved here. He thinks he's above the rules." One of the deputies shook his head, clearly tired of her antics. "Ma'am, HOA rules are not criminal law. You don't get to enforce them with fake officers. That's not how any of this works." The neighbors laughed openly at that, the sound spreading down the street like wildfire. Karen turned red with humiliation, her reputation in the community shredded in front of her very eyes. As the squad cars pulled away, sirens quiet now, the deputies stayed behind to take my full statement. I explained the sequence of events, from the knock on the door to the imposter's threats, and the dispatcher confirmed the timeline from my call. Everything lined up perfectly, every detail reinforcing the truth. By the time I finished, Karen had slinked back to her house, her once defiant posture replaced with hunched shoulders and a pale face. The queen of the HOA had just been dethroned in the most public way possible. When the deputies finally wrapped up and left, I stood on my porch, neighbors still gathered in small groups, murmuring and nodding in my direction. Some even clapped quietly, others gave me thumbs up, their respect clear. They had just witnessed what happens when a bully takes things too far and runs into someone who refuses to be intimidated. Karen had lost her grip on the neighborhood that night, and she knew it. As I turned back into my house, I felt the calm satisfaction of a man who had faced down a farce and exposed it for what it was. The fakes were gone, Karen was humiliated, and the truth was clear for everyone to see. When the last set of cruiser lights faded down the street and the rumble of engines disappeared into the night, the neighborhood settled into an uneasy quiet. But it wasn't the same quiet as before, it was charged, electric, like the air after a storm. Neighbors were still outside, lingering on sidewalks, gathered in small knots of conversation, phones in hand replaying the footage they had just recorded. Every whisper carried Karen's name, every glance cut toward her house where the blinds had snapped shut in a hurry. She was hiding now, the woman who had strutted like a queen only an hour earlier. The HOA president, the self-proclaimed enforcer of rules, had been exposed in front of everyone as nothing more than a desperate fraud willing to orchestrate a fake arrest just to feed her power. I stood on my porch, arms folded, letting the moment sink in. For months, I had tolerated her harassment. The written complaints, the snide remarks, the threats of fines she couldn't legally enforce. She had pushed every button she could think of, testing me the way she tested every neighbor, expecting me to fold like so many before me had. But I wasn't built for folding. I was built for standing tall, for recognizing bullies and facing them head-on. Tonight proved that the louder she screamed, the weaker her foundation really was. By morning, the whole neighborhood was buzzing. Word of the fake officer stunt spread like wildfire. Videos had already made it onto community Facebook pages, and people were replaying the scene of Karen shouting about HOA Code 17 like it was some kind of law. Memes were already circulating, Karen in a crown, Karen pointing at my house with captions like, "Bow to the HOA Queen," and "Code 17 violator." The damage to her reputation was complete. Neighbors who once trembled at her threats now laughed openly. People who had hidden their frustrations finally stepped into the sunlight, emboldened by what they had seen. For the first time, Karen wasn't the most powerful person in the neighborhood, she was its biggest joke. But the laughter was just the beginning. The sheriff's office wasn't about to let this slide. By midday, an official notice went out confirming that 3 men had been arrested for impersonating officers, attempted unlawful entry, and conspiracy. The statement also mentioned potential community involvement, though they didn't name Karen directly. Everyone in the neighborhood knew what that meant. Karen's front porch, once a place she used to lecture neighbors about weeds in their yards or trash cans left out too long, was now a crime scene in people's eyes. Deputies came back to question her further, and though I couldn't hear the conversation, I could see the fear etched across her face as she answered their questions. For the first time, Karen wasn't the one demanding compliance, she was the one being cornered. That evening, as I walked my dog down the street, neighbors stopped me to talk. One older couple shook my hand firmly, thanking me for standing up to Karen when no one else could. A young father nodded with respect and said he finally felt like he could let his kids ride their bikes without worrying about Karen jumping out with a clipboard and yelling about safety violations. Even the quiet family 2 houses down, who had kept to themselves since moving in, stepped out to say how relieved they were that someone had finally put Karen in her place. It wasn't just about me, it was about the whole community realizing they didn't have to live under her thumb anymore. Meanwhile, Karen tried to spin the story. She sent out a mass email to the HOA mailing list, calling the incident a misunderstanding, and claiming she had only hired security consultants to address neighborhood concerns. But nobody was buying it. Screenshots of her email were mocked in group chats and posted online with sarcastic captions. The deputies had already confirmed the men were impersonators, and Karen's attempt to reframe it as consultants only made her look worse. The harder she tried to claw back control, the deeper she sank into the hole she had dug. The final blow came a week later. A formal notice was delivered to every house in the community, calling for an emergency HOA meeting. Word spread quickly that several board members had turned against her, fed up with her antics and worried about their own reputations being tied to her disaster. When the meeting came, it was standing room only, neighbors packed into the community hall, tension buzzing like a live wire. Karen walked in with her head high, trying to project the same old authority, but it was gone. No one respected her anymore. She tried to speak, tried to defend herself, but every word was met with murmurs of disbelief, eye rolls, even laughter. Then came the vote. It wasn't close. By an overwhelming majority, Karen was stripped of her position as HOA president, removed from the board, and banned from holding any leadership role in the future. I didn't gloat, didn't need to. The victory wasn't just mine, it belonged to every neighbor who had endured her nonsense for years. As the decision was announced, people clapped, some even cheered. Karen's face turned red, her mouth twisting into a bitter scowl, but she couldn't fight it. The power she had clung to so desperately had slipped through her fingers, taken not by me alone but by the very community she thought she controlled. She stormed out of the hall, muttering under her breath, but no one followed her. No one cared anymore. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to me again, thanking me not just for handling the fake officer stunt but for standing firm against her from the beginning. "You showed us she wasn't invincible," one man said, and I could see the relief in his eyes. That was the real victory, not just exposing Karen, but freeing the neighborhood from the fear she had created. The sheriff's office pursued charges against the imposters, and rumors swirled that Karen might face charges of her own for conspiracy and fraud. Whether or not that happened, her reign was over. Her influence was gone. The HOA began functioning like it was supposed to, handling actual community matters instead of policing mailboxes and barking orders. The street felt lighter, friendlier, as though a weight had been lifted. And me? I went back to living my life, walking my dog, working on my truck, and enjoying my porch without the constant shadow of Karen's interference. I knew bullies like her never really stopped. They just moved on to a new tactic or a new target. But it didn't matter anymore. She had tried to break me, to scare me, even to humiliate me with fake officers. Instead, she had humiliated herself. She had handed me the opportunity to show the truth, and I hadn't wasted it. Late one evening, as I sat outside watching the sun dip low behind the trees, a thought crossed my mind. Karen had underestimated me from the start. She thought I was just another neighbor to push around, another box to check off her list of victories. She never realized that I wasn't just some guy with a house. I was the man who had trained real warriors, men and women who faced life-and-death situations with steel in their spines. Compared to that, Karen's power games were child's play. She had sent fake officers to arrest me, but in the end, it was her authority that was arrested, locked away forever in the past. And as I sat there, the night peaceful once again, I couldn't help but smile. Sometimes the best way to deal with a bully isn't to shout louder, it's to let them expose themselves, and then stand steady while the truth does the rest.